But this action to the environment caused a very arid environment for the farmers. I mean, they caused it to themselves, but they caused it for survival reasons and lack of actual knowledge. So the cycle of poverty perpetuates because now not only we don't have coffee, but we have a very arid and depleted land to cultivate anything else, which causes food insecurity for the near and long future, and at the same time creates a place. I mean, every time I go to Harrar, people say they see me as a foreigner, like an NGO, automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And they start shouting to me, we need water. I would drill us a well. The thing is, even if we drill a well, we will not find water easily because that water had been
Drunk by the eucalyptus.
Yes.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Mapper Forward's workshop, It's Time to Become a Coffee Consultant. Learn how to diversify your revenue streams and create freedom from your day job while saying goodbye to that alarm clock forever by becoming a consultant within the coffee industry or directly to consumers who have shifted towards home brewing and home roasting. Protect your income from challenging times in the coffee value chain by taking this course today. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a very, very important series on the podcast. Perhaps one of the most important series that I think we've ever done on the podcast. Joining me on this series, I am honored and humbled to have Heleanna Georgalis from MPC Trading, Moplaco Trading from Ethiopia. Heleanna, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Lee, thank you so much for having me. And for me, it's an honor to be part of the most famous coffee podcast.
You humble me. Honestly, you humble me. You and I have had many a conversation over the past few months about this subject, and we have been waiting for the right time to have this conversation. I think that what we're going to discuss here in this series is something that's very important for the global industry to understand, because there are things that are happening in Ethiopia that people need to be made aware of. I have alluded to this on the podcast through this year, and I am just so honored that we finally get to discuss this openly. So, folks, in this series, we're going to be talking about what's happening in coffee in Ethiopia. And I've been hearing a lot of people say to me this year, there's something wrong with the coffee that's coming out of Ethiopia. The quality doesn't kind of taste the same as we're used to from Ethiopia. Something's not right. And of course, I can't talk about it because it's not for me to talk about, but you can talk about it. Tell everybody what you do, Heleanna.
So I am a coffee exporter predominantly, which means that we buy coffee from all over the country, prepare it and export it. Mm-hmm. That's the main function of the business. On the sidelines, I mean, at the back, in order, like a supporting activity to this export, we have now obtained our own washing stations where we will produce our own coffee to export it. So we are, let's say we are vertically integrated. So we have a farm where we produce and process our own coffee. Then we have processing stations where we buy cherry from the farmers, process our own coffee. Then we have so-called strategic partners or alliances with people that buy cherry from other areas of Ethiopia that we don't have our own stations. And then we buy this coffee for process and export based on quality, approval, and client demand.
Okay. You are not, I want people to be very clear on something. You are not a small operation, correct?
Yes, let's say I'm a medium-sized one with the capacity to be a very large one. But right. I will also tell you why I'm not a large one anymore, because our company was one of the top 10 exporters for almost 60 years until I came. And then you might think that it was a failure that I did not continue to the same steps or capacity, fulfilling the capacity that we have. But I took a strategic decision that any other action other than top quality coffee would lose me money if I operate normally.
And for the sake of again, we're setting the stage of exactly what you do here. How long has the company been in operation?
Look, the company as an export facility from 1971.
Right.
The family coffee from 1896.
Okay.
So coffee has been part of the business, yeah?
Right. So it's not a small operation. It's not a new operation. And you're not new into this business. How long have you been in this business?
Wait, I am very surprised to even state this to myself, that I've been here for 17 years.
Okay.
Like when I realized it, it was like, wow, how have I been in the country for so long?
and people may be saying, but you don't sound like you come from Ethiopia. So
yes, okay. Yeah, of course they would say that. I sound, look, act, eat definitely Greek. But it's a fourth generation living in Ethiopia, born in Ethiopia, raised in Ethiopia. I'm the only one that didn't live here during my childhood years because there was a communist regime. So my father considered appropriate for us to move out of the country. Like, I think, because the times were very tough. But let's say my grandparents were born here from my mother's side.
Right.
Then my mother was born here. My father's family were all born here. Then I left and came back for 70 long years. And now my daughter is being raised here. So it's like long life in Ethiopia, let's say. We have a karma to fulfill.
Nice. So folks, we've established that when, with Heleanna in this conversation, we're not talking to somebody who is not informed or is new to the industry or is not deeply ingrained or doesn't have a successful business or doesn't have a long-standing business. Everything you're about to hear is from somebody who is highly connected, very successful, has a lot of experience, is deeply embedded in the global community when it comes to coffee, okay, in Ethiopia and beyond. It is important, once you hear the context of this conversation, for you to have that information. As I said, in this series, we're going to talk about what's happening in coffee in Ethiopia. You're going to hear themes discussed throughout this whole series, but in this particular episode, we're going to be talking about how trading coffee impacts the life of farmers in Ethiopia. My job in this conversation is to get out of Heleanna's way and let Heleanna talk about what she wants to talk about. So Heleanna, how is trading coffee impacting the life of coffee farmers in Ethiopia? And start wherever you would like to start.
Okay, I think it's easier for people to understand because they have experienced that. Like people that have been in the industry for long enough, they don't have to be 40 years in the industry, but let's say at least 17 like me. Everybody knows that the most famous Ethiopian coffee, in the past at least, used to be Harrar coffee. A coffee grown in the east side of the country, very similar to Yemen coffee, even in geographical distribution, let's say. So the environment of Harrar is very reflective to the environment of Yemen, with long mountains, terraces, and steep hills, and so on, and a very dry environment. So Harrar was traditionally the heart of coffee from Ethiopia, and it was the first coffee that was ever commercialized. It was commercialized by the Ottomans, re-exported to Europe and the rest of the world through the port of Mocha in Yemen. Hence the name of Ethiopian mocha. So when people identify the coffee, they get a very specific flavor of coffee that used to come from the port of Mocha in Yemen. So they used to identify this coffee as the coffee with the mocha flavor, whatever that meant to them. So this coffee has seen a very steady but very rapid decline in the last 30 years. And why? Because farmers considered it much more profitable to cultivate other cash crops, such as eucalyptus or Khat, which is like a local dry, than cultivate coffee. And why? Because, the answer is never a simple one, and it's never in a vacuum, meaning that so many things are happening before a final decision or a final result is actually seen. So coffee was commercialized. When it was commercialized, it was like monopolized by the Ottomans to be exported. Farmers were intensively working on the coffee fields, only coffee. Now, when the land was distributed to smallholder farmers, and this land started to be subdivided into smaller and smaller pieces, so it can be inherited by their children, now the number of coffee trees that can be planted in these smaller lands is, of course, limited. Now, coffee in Ethiopia, because of its very sensitive nature, growing in high altitudes, under shade, being typica arabica, having low yields, if you have 10 trees, you cannot make a life out of it. Even if you have 1,000 trees, you cannot make a life out of it. So farmers soon realized that this kind of fragmented land system that they inherited from generation to generation did not allow them to make money by cultivating coffee. Because the yields were low, the land was scarce, the number of trees planted could be only limited in this land. Now, this was further strengthened by what prices the world and the traders were willing to pay. And we can all talk about, how good we are with the farmers and how much of a fair price we would like to pay, or we actually think we are paying. But the reality is, this is a lot of marketing talk or wishful thinking. Not necessarily empty talking, but just wishful thinking, without us being able to understand the reality on the ground. So the farmer reacts to this reality because he has to survive. And how does he react? He looks for ways to make more cash to feed his family and himself. If coffee is not his cash crop, then other cash crops have to be planted. Now, then we need to understand the trader. Trader, as we know, when we trade, all of us, no matter how good of a people we are, we always think we need to buy cheaper than what we sell. And given the reality of the international market that has been traditionally very low for coffee, traders, of course, had a very limit of price ranges that they could afford to pay for their coffee. So all this chain of events, the fragmented land system, the low yields of Arabica typica, the limited number of trees we can actually plant, and the prices traders and the international market could afford to pay, resulted in the farmers deciding that coffee is no longer a profitable cash crop. Yes, they love coffee. Ethiopians are born into coffee. They always like to have in their land 10 trees of coffee for their own usage. But frankly speaking, they cannot care less about if the world gets access to Harrar coffee or not. They could only care if the world that cared so much about Harrar coffee would pay the right prices for them to continue having an incentive to plant it.
And it doesn't.
And it doesn't. So almost 30 years ago, they started uprooting coffee and replanting chat and eucalyptus. Now, we need to understand that also action, reaction, everything we do impacts us. So the farmers, by replanting coffee and uprooting coffee, replanting with eucalyptus and chat, drives the environment around them. Because chat is highly water intensive, and eucalyptus also drains any underground water, and hence dries up the environment because there's no humidity and condensation, hence no rain. So we created an environment in Harrar that has become quite arid and very dry. Now, was Harrar always this way? No. It was, of course, a drier area of Ethiopia, but had not always been desertic almost. So coffee normally would be found underneath huge ficus trees surrounded by other kind of vegetation, which nowadays is completely lost. Because coffee and the forest used to have a very symbiotic relationship. Coffee ensured that the forest continues to exist, and the forest gave everything the coffee needed to have. So if we don't plant coffee and we plant chat, actually we don't want the forest because chat grows in sunlight. Now, why I'm saying that, I don't want to talk about deforestation, at least not here, but this action to the environment caused a very arid environment for the farmers. I mean, they caused it to themselves, but they caused it for survival reasons and lack of actual knowledge. So the cycle of poverty perpetuates because now not only we don't have coffee, but we have a very arid and depleted land to cultivate anything else, which causes food insecurity for the near and long future, and at the same time creates a place. I mean, every time I go to Harrar, people say they see me as a foreigner, like an NGO, automatically. Mm-hmm. And they start talking to me, we need water. I would drill us a well. The thing is, even if we drill a well, we will not find water easily because that water had been
drunk
depleted
by the eucalyptus.
Yes. So, and the other thing the farmer noticed with coffee and prices of coffee is that we cultivate coffee only once a year in Ethiopia. And that one time, it gives us very low yield of excellent coffee. Mm. But this excellent coffee, no matter how much effort the farmer would do, will not pay him off because the market was limited by what the international market would determine. So, of course, the farmer said, so that I don't want to plant excellent coffee that nobody's willing to pay for. So what he started to do is becoming indifferent on the quality of coffee he produces and focuses really on his production of chat that can be cultivated and harvested 3 times a year and gives almost 10 times more of price to what coffee does.
Right.
So it's a very rational decision from humble people. And when I say humble, these are people that have not been educated. They don't have the long vision perspective that we do because their basic needs of today and tomorrow have not been met.
So they're making short-term decisions.
Yes.
Because they're always in survival mode.
Exactly. And now, do they cause this survival mode to themselves? Yes, they do. They do by deforesting and cutting and depleting and so on. But at the same time, it's like, why are they doing that? It's
they don't have the luxury, right?
No,
to think longer than that.
Exactly, yes. And we tend to forget, and I am part of this way, okay? That to make very good choices in life, being a Greek, I have come to the conclusion that you need to have philosophical thinking and critical thinking. Now, we don't have philosophical thinking with people that plow the land barefoot on a day-to-day basis.
Heleanna, philosophical thinking is a privilege.
Correct. So these people lacking the capacity to have a philosophical thinking, they also have the capacity to think in the long term. Okay, right. So why I brought the Harrar example, because it's an example we have all seen. We no longer find Harrar coffee. And if we do, it's of low quality, very highly priced. And to be honest, they don't care if we can sell it or not, because the local consumption will absorb it, because Ethiopians consume a lot of coffee. The local consumption does not demand quality. They get whatever it is to get. And the local consumption pays higher than the export.
Right.
So you see how all these factors, whether it is the middlemen, the exporters, that are also limited by the international price, finally affects the life of the farmer. So what do we see now? You know, very funny. I was actually with a British or a South African guy in Harrar. And we were running around with the local administrator because obviously you cannot just enter the farms of coffee. Farmers will get upset. So we had to have a local administrator to guide us. And he said to us, Look at all these people. They make thousands of birds from chat. Yet, where is the wealth? You cannot see it anywhere.
Right.
You cannot see it good housing or high education or well-dressed people or some sort of development. And really, I became gobsmacked. And I thought, wow, these farmers made 10 times more than what they would have made in coffee.
And still they're poor.
And they're still very poor. Why? Again, nothing is so easy to understand. They are still very poor because the land is poor and they cannot actually cultivate other things together with the child to eat. So all their money goes to buy food and necessities because they cannot produce anything by themselves. Second, the land is now dead. Even if they try to plant, they cannot obtain the result that they want. And three,
Wow.
by chewing chat themselves, they become stupefied.
Yep.
Okay. Why do they chew chat themselves? Again, it's a complex question. Chat forbids hunger.
Right.
So when you chew chat, you don't feel any hunger.
And they're hungry.
And they are hungry. At least a lot of them. Two, yes, they do generate a lot of more cash, but again, they are not aware of their actual situation. So they give birth to maybe 12, 7, 8 kids. So no matter how many cash you obtain, it's never enough to actually help these kids develop and live a proper life. Are there people that make money? Yes, there are always people that make money. But we are talking now about the vast majority. Okay? So again, what we saw in Harrar is a clear representation of how everything will affect the life of the farmer. And not for today, for the long run.
Okay. So this is the basis, folks, of the next 4 episodes. And I promise you, this deep dive is very, very important because we've just spoken about Harrar. We haven't spoken about Yoshefe. We haven't spoken about everything from Sidama to Sidamo. And it is really, really important if you are in coffee because you have Ethiopian coffee. You have depended on Ethiopian coffee in your roastery and in your cafe for decades. That's changing. And it's changing rapidly. So tune in for the next episode where we're going to continue this very, very important conversation with Heleanna. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward.